Okay, so you've had your introduction, you've watched the previous video explaining the 4 components of our DISC work styles and how they show up in the workplace, and now we are going to start digging into this, I was going to say glorious document, but it's not actually all that glorious at all. This document that was used by the city of Seattle in training its white employees, because they have segregated trainings in the city of Seattle, as of this recording anyway. They use this document to train their white employees about what a white supremacy culture at work looks like. Now, there are actually 15 different components to this document, and in the course of the rest of the videos in this series, we are going to take a look at each and every component, and I am going to show you emphatically that the grievances that they have brought up in this document have nothing to do with the color of your skin. It has nothing to do with white supremacy. It has nothing to do with gender, because work style doesn't have anything to do with gender. It has nothing to do with age or generation. It has nothing to do with anything other than the individual work styles and how they show up in the workplace. So we are going to get started at the start, which is a very good place to start, with perfectionism. And I am going to show you how those DISC work styles that we just went through in the last video show up when it comes to their grievances around perfectionism. Okay, so let's start with the first one. And I literally am going to go through each of their bullet points and explain how this is related to work style and not race or identity or any other immutable characteristic. Okay, perfectionism. Their first grievance is a white supremacist culture is when little appreciation is expressed among people for the work that others are doing. Appreciation that is expressed is usually directed to those who get the most credit anyway. Now, when I see this attribute show up in the workplace, what I'm seeing is a CD style of approach to work. What you're going to see, actually back up a sec, what you're going to be seeing in each of these components is a fundamental conflict between the DC styles, which tend to be more skeptical and process focused, and they really don't have a whole lot of place for emotions or people at all. You're going to see a fundamental conflict between those styles and the IS styles, which is all about people. And so that's what you're going to see showing up over and over again. With this first attribute of little appreciation being shown, well, that's going to be a combination of the C and the D style. That's going to be like the DC style or the CD style. They're basically the same thing when you have the combo types. That is the classic aggressor in the workplace. It's actually one of the most difficult work styles to have and to manage, because not only is it a very challenging work style, remember we talked about competitiveness and those who have a high challenge score, and we'll get involved in conflicts and have a lot of interpersonal conflict in the office. We talked about that in the last video. That is what is showing up when you're seeing little appreciation expressed, because the DC style is the classic style that's going to say, well, I don't need to give you a thank you. You're doing your job. I am paying you to do this. Whereas if we went to the other side of the DISC profile and looked at those IS tendencies, those work styles are going to be like, oh my God, yes, you are amazing. And they're going to give out all the positive feedback in the world. By the way, positive feedback and recognition is actually something that we train on. I train people on how, especially people with those CD styles, on how to give out positive feedback. I train that it's a good thing. I have never once trained it as as combating white supremacy in work organizations to give out positive feedback. But hey, I guess maybe if I wanted to do that, it'd be a little trick to getting people to actually do what I tell them to do. All right, point number 2, under perfectionism, more common is to point out either how the person or the work is inadequate. And I want to say too, I'm using the direct text from that worksheet. And so if it seems as though some of these sentences don't make sense, I didn't write it, folks. I'm going based on the worksheet that the city of Seattle is using to train its employees. So the first one was little appreciation shown among people for the work that they do. The next one, more common, so it's building off that last one. More common is to point out how the person or work is inadequate. Now, sometimes you have to give out critical feedback at work, but again, Just like the previous slide, this is something that someone with that strong DC style would do, is to point out if something is delivered and it is not done at a certain quality, is not done the way they want to see it done. When you have the D and the C work style, and especially if they're combined, you're going to expect that people do their job. And so if they're not doing their job, you're going to be very quick to point out, here is where you didn't do your job. You can also see in this white box over near where the star is, you're going to see attributes like questioning, logic focus, objective, skeptical, and challenging. Those are the work style attributes of someone that is going to point out, as the document states, that the work is inadequate. Now, I have never actually seen someone in a workplace point out that the person is inadequate, but put that one in your back pocket. We're going to come back to that one in a little bit. All right, number 3 bullet point under perfectionism is, or even more common, to talk to others about the inadequacies of a person or their work without ever talking directly to them. So in this one, they're complaining where it's probably in their heads they have an example of a boss who's not satisfied with what their employee is doing, and instead of just going to the employee and giving them that feedback, they kind of grumble and gossip behind their back. Now, this is a classic kind of C thing to do, so you can see that star has moved down a little bit into the C category. This is not really something a D would do. A D is always going to be very direct and firm, and if someone with a strong D work style has a problem with you, they're going to tell you. But C's are a little bit more cagey. C's are not necessarily social butterflies in the office. If C's didn't have to deal with people at all on a day-to-day basis, they would be perfectly happy not doing that. So a C is going to be much more likely to kind of grumble behind the person's back and never address the problem directly. And that is absolutely a challenge that C's have, and that is absolutely something they should not be doing. You should not be doing this in the workplace. But the point is that it has nothing to do with race. It has everything to do with the work style involved. Let's keep going. Next up, mistakes are seen as personal, i.e., they reflect badly on the person making them as opposed to being seen for what they are, mistakes. Now remember, in the disc overview video, we talked about how someone with that strong C work style, they really don't like being wrong. They really fear being wrong. No one likes being wrong, but C's really don't like being wrong. And what you're seeing, the star has now moved squarely into the C category, right? It's kind of like that classic C work style. I put it there because C's have a very strong accuracy tendency. This is where it comes from, that they see things in kind of black and white. Either you're right or wrong, good or bad. Either you're correct or you're incorrect. That's where that shows up on the disc profile. So when people are making mistakes, they can definitely go to a darker place of saying, "Oh my God, what were they doing in school? Weren't they studying? Didn't they learn how to do this in school? Why? Like, they need a that is the classic copy editor profile, by the way. That strong C approach with a nice high accuracy score. That's the person's going to be a great copy editor, and they're going to be very critical of mistakes. But again, this has nothing to do with race. This has to do with their work style. Let's keep going. Making a mistake is confused with being a mistake. Doing wrong with being wrong. Now, you'll notice on this one, I put a little star. Because I've worked with all different types of organizations. I've worked with so many organizations and so many people, and I really racked my brain on this one. And I was trying to think, I was like, have I ever actually seen this occur in the workplace? I don't actually think I have. Now, I'm not going to say that it has never occurred in any workplace ever, but calling an employee or a coworker a mistake as a person because they made a mistake, I've never actually seen that occurred. So I have to kind of do my best guess at this one, because I can't think of a time when this has happened. But if this were to occur, if there was a person who was calling another person a mistake as a human being, I think that's going to come from the D's, because it's a very hyperbolic statement, isn't it? Like, you're a mistake as a human being because you made a mistake. That's going to come from a strong D leader who is disappointed in the person they are communicating with. And they're trying to hurt the person. If someone is saying something like this at work, they are trying to hurt the person. They are trying to really make sure that that person knows that this is not acceptable and will not be tolerated. And if you do it again, I'm going to make you feel lower than dirt. That is something that a D is going to do. If you have taken a D out of control and messed up and really made them feel as though you are jeopardizing their chances of winning, they are going to come at you in the most evil way that they can. Now, again, I want to emphasize, this does not happen often. It really doesn't. I'm talking about very, very exceptional cases. I mean, listen, there are of course bad bosses out there. There are of course bad coworkers, but in the grand scheme of things, this does not happen with any sort of consistency, at least in the people that I've worked with. Let's keep going. Next up, we have little time or energy or money is put into reflection or identifying lessons learned that can improve practice. In other words, little or no learning from mistakes. So again, they're saying that this is an attribute of a white supremacist organization, that little or no learning from mistakes happens. That is a classic D thing. Now, we talked about, remember, the D is like the bull in the china shop. They don't really care if they break things. They care about getting to their goal. And so if they have to break things, if they have to walk over bodies on their way to get to that goal, they are going to do it, and they don't really care to kind of go back and do an after-action report, an after-action review, which is something that does happen in organizations all the time, which is exactly what this says. An after-action review is specifically when you go back and you analyze your mistakes, you analyze how a project went, and you say, oh, this could be better, we should do this next time. It's called an after-action review, or there are other names for it as well, but that's the one I learned it as. A post-mortem is another name for it. So they're actually going back and identifying mistakes. That is a classic S thing. That is a classic S thing, which is why we put the star under D on this one. The D work style is not going to be as inclined to do this. They're going to already have moved on to the next project. They're going to perceive it as a waste of time. Let's keep going. Perfectionism. Tendency to identify what's wrong. Little ability to identify, name, and appreciate what's right. And again, I'm going to put this squarely in the CD category because this is all about the challenge, the skepticism score coming out, that challenge score. And I see this showing up all the time with my DC clients, is they have a really hard time focusing their energy and attention on things that are going right rather than things that are going wrong. And we see this again, anytime you want to know anything about the DISC profile, the quickest cheat sheet you have is these little white boxes on either side of the screen. So you can see the white box over here next to DC. That's questioning, logic focus, objective, skeptical, challenging. Whereas the opposite of that is going to be the IS work style, which is accepting, people focused, empathizing, receptive, and agreeable. The IS style is going to be much more inclined to focus on the things that are going right rather than the things that are going wrong. The CD work style is going to be much more inclined, because they are direct polar opposites, to focus on things that are going wrong rather than things are going right. So again, that can be explained by work style. Next up, this is a long one. Often internally felt. In other words, the perfectionist fails to appreciate her own good work. And isn't it interesting that they use the feminine pronoun there? Side note. More often pointing out, they mixed it up, didn't they? More often pointing out his faults or failures, focusing on inadequacies and mistakes rather than learning from them. The person works with a harsh and constant inner critic. That harsh and constant inner critic is part of the C work style. I actually once had a client, she was a DC, but she had a lot of C in her, that she said, Carlin, I have a crazy roommate in my head that is constantly criticizing. So she knew, she got to call that crazy, harsh inner critic, that source of constant criticism of her work, she called that her crazy roommate. She was Asian, by the way, so she wasn't even white. So that's where that comes from. And again, this is all about the C's propensity for a very high level of accuracy, and that they hate being wrong. And so they are, because they expect so much of themselves, that's part of what makes them so demanding onto others. It's how we treat other people is a reflection of how we feel about ourselves, right? So if we are our worst critic, if we're constantly putting ourselves down and looking for faults in what we're producing, we're going to do the same thing with other people, because how we treat other people is a reflection of how we feel about ourselves. So that is where that comes from as a square C work style thing. All right, so those are all the grievances from this particular document. We got a little appreciation, pointing out how the work is inadequate. It's even more common to talk to others about inadequacies. Mistakes are seen as personal. Mistake is confused with being a mistake as a person, etc., etc. So we've gone through all of the grievances. And now we're going to come down here and do this. Oh, my mouse does show up over there. Okay, do this. Sorry, I'm working out what it's like to do this with two screens. Now we're going to do this antidotes section. So essentially what this document does is it first gives a bullet point list of grievances about a white supremacist work culture, and then it says, here is the answer. Here is what we really want. So let's see. We'll start off with the first antidote to white supremacist culture, and they say, instead, develop a culture of appreciation where the organization takes time to make sure that people's work and effort are appreciated, which is very important. It's also a key attribute of the IS style. People with the IS work style are going to be much more inclined to do this. It's going to be much more easy for them because, again, our little white box cheat sheet, accepting, people-focused, empathizing, receptive, and agreeable. That's what you can expect to see out of those IS work styles. Next up, develop a learning organization where it's expected that everyone will make mistakes and those mistakes offer opportunities for learning. Now remember, we talked about how the Ds are not going to care to have after action reviews at all. Well, guess who will then? The S's, because they're exactly the opposite of the D. So S's are going to be all about a learning culture. S's are all about identifying problems and making sure you fix those problems so that everyone is happy and everything is nice and everything is stable and everything is consistent. That is what S's do in the workplace. So that is a classic attribute of the steadiness or supporter work style. Next up, create an environment where people can recognize that mistakes sometimes lead to positive results. Now, our I's and our S's in particular, but I's also do this to a certain extent. You know, the great thing about the I work style is oftentimes they don't come down harshly on mistakes. They're all like, what's the opportunity? How can we turn this around? How can we make this a good thing? And so I kind of did this as a combination of the two because I's and S's both actually already do this in really distinct ways. So I's, like I said, they're all going to be about what's the opportunity here? How can we make this a good thing? How can we turn this around? They're going to be very excited. They're going to talk very fast like that. S's are going to be like, yes, we need to recognize that mistakes happen and it's just part of the process. And what can we learn from those mistakes? How can we prevent those mistakes next time? So it is going to be the difference between I's are going to be much more about what can we do right now. S's are going to be much more about planning for the long term. I's don't plan for the long term. I's are like, what's going on right now? What can I do right now? S's are all about how can we utilize this information to make sure this doesn't come up again? How can we fix this problem for a year from now? We don't have to deal with it anymore. And they do actually talk slowly like that as well. So I kind of put it between the two. I split the difference. I think that's a good way to go. Next up, separate the person from the mistake. And this is kind of to counterbalance when they said the person is the mistake. Well, no, not really. But I's are going to be masterful at doing this. S's will do this too, but I's are really like, you know what I's are? I's are like the happy puppy. They're always going to love you. It doesn't matter. They're like the best, most doting mother in the world. Even if they're a dude, they're like the best, most doting mother in the world. To be like, you know what, honey? It's okay. I still love you just the way you are. So I's are always going to do this, whereas C's are going to be much more inclined to be like, you know, you screwed up, like you're a defective person. C's are absolutely going to do that. And that's why I's and C's are polar opposites. Next up, when offering feedback, always speak to the things that went well before offering criticism. First off, just generally speaking, this is horrible advice. You never sandwich feedback. Never sandwich feedback ever. It is a horrible technique. It is mind-bogglingly stupid because when you put a negative piece of feedback next to a positive piece of feedback, what you are doing is you are negating the value of giving out that positive feedback, because the human brain will always put more emphasis on the negative than the positive. And so you've just wasted an opportunity to give out beautiful positive feedback. What did they say at the beginning of this? Or let me go back even to the beginning. The very first grievance that they had, little appreciation is expressed among people for the work that others are doing. The appreciation is expressed as usually directed at those who get the most credit anyway. So what you're doing when you take this really god-awful advice, I have to find my slide again, sorry. Hang on, stand by, there we go. What you're doing when you give out this really god-awful advice of sandwiching or placing a negative piece of feedback against a positive piece of feedback is you're setting the person up to not receive the positive piece of feedback. So this is horrible advice. Don't take it. The person who wrote this doesn't know what they're talking about, but let's just focus in on what they want and explain how that's going to manifest based on work style. So eyes are always going to do this. Again, eyes are like that doting mother. They're always going to give you positive feedback. It's always going to be warm and fluffy and lovely. They're always going to do this. So that is definitely an eye thing. Next up, ask people to offer specific suggestions for how to do things differently when offering criticism. So this is definitely an S thing to do, which is ironic because S's actually really struggle with giving out negative feedback. They can do it, but S's are oftentimes very timid. They don't want to be seen as, coming down on you. C's are going to be much more inclined to give out negative feedback than S's every day of the week. But S's, if they are giving out negative feedback, they're going to try to spin it in a positive way. They're not going to focus on what you did wrong this time. Like I said, S's are the long-term planners. So they're going to be like, okay, well, you did it this way this time. Next time, could we try doing it this way? And then usually what they do is they go into a period of negotiation with you to see what it would take for you to change the way that you're doing something. Next up, and this is the last one we're going to look at before wrapping up this video, realize that being your own worst critic does not actually improve the work, often contributes to low morale among the group, and does not help you or the group realize the benefits of learning from mistakes. Now you'll see that of all the antidotes, this is the only one that was written in the negative, right? Every other antidote to white supremacy culture was written in the positive, the affirmative. This is written in the negative. So of course, this is actually another grievance disguised as an antidote. And that's going to show up squarely in that C work style because, as we've already discussed, C's are their own worst critic. Okay, so to wrap up, do any of the grievances that we discussed have to do with race? Do any of the antidotes that we discussed have to do with race? No. They all have to do with work style. Every single one of them have to do with work style, as we can see from the fact that we're seeing, so I've got the red ones are the negative ones that showed up, the grievances, and the green ones are the positive attributes that they want to create to say that this is not a white supremacist organization. You can see they're literally polar opposites. It is a mirror image of each other on the disc work style, which shows you that this is not about race. This is not being socialized in a white supremacist society. It has nothing to do with that. It simply has to do with these people wanting to create a more warm, fuzzy, kind, empathetic environment. And there is value to the things that they brought up. Let's just be real. There is value to the things they brought up. However, you cannot create a functioning workplace that is all about all the warm fuzzies all the time. It does not work. We need all four work styles. Remember, we talked about in the disc video, the last one that you watched, hopefully if you did the right thing, we talked about the fact that everyone is a blend of all four styles, and all four styles have strengths and all four styles have challenges, and the strengths of one work style balance out the challenges of another. So we can see here that the attributes that they've highlighted under perfectionism highlights challenges among the D and C work style. But guess what? the strengths of the IS work style are going to balance that out. And even better, if we can train the DC work styles to stretch outside of their comfort zone, and you can do this, I do it all the time, if we can train them to stretch outside of their comfort zone and act more like an IS, even if that's not their natural inclination, then that is going to help influence that as well. My biggest grievance with this document is not that they blatantly got stuff wrong because they don't know what they're talking about, but they're attributing aspects that are directly related to work style and communication conflicts and conflicts of approach. They're attributing that to being raised in a white supremacist culture. This has nothing to do with race because the DISC work style assessment has nothing to do with race. The outcome has nothing to do with it. It is an even distribution among everyone. We know that. We have an F ton of data to back that up. So I hope I've showed in our first video that perfectionism, not about white supremacy, it's simply about work style and approach, and we will be continuing on with the rest of this series very, very shortly. Spoiler alert, they're all going to look pretty similar to this. But I said I was going to do a thorough debunking, and I am committed to that thorough debunking. See you soon.